Hello and welcome everybody. This is our first series of videos. As I mentioned in class, I'm going to be posting videos each week to help you go through the information that you're going to be covering in the various chapters. This week we're going to be covering chapters 2 and 3. Chapters 2 and 3 deal with many exciting cultures, including the early Hebrews, the Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, and the ancient Greeks. These videos I find will be a helpful way for you to help go through the information that you're covering in the chapters and present it in a more easy to access way. Like I said, there's no need to watch all the videos at once unless you like to. You can go through the week and when you have time to cover the videos. But you will need to watch all of them before the beginning of class and make sure to write down any questions that you may have as you go through the videos. The first culture I want to cover is the ancient Hebrews. Now the ancient Hebrews were a Semitic speaking people. Semitic is the language sphere upon which Hebrew falls under. There are many other languages that fall under the Semitic sphere. These include Neo-Aramaic, Akkadian, which is now extinct, but also modern-day Arabic, which is widely spoken throughout the Middle East. These languages share a common root, essentially a Semitic root. As we go through future civilizations, we'll be able to acknowledge the various other languages that are connected in different spheres. But Hebrew and Arabic do have a common root, which is pretty exciting. Now, the Hebrews themselves had existed for some time before the founding of what's called the Kingdom of Israel. The Kingdom of Israel was founded probably around circa 1000 BC with the establishment of King Saul as their leader. King Saul helped establish and fortify many of the Israelite tribes. He was followed by some famous figures from the Bible, including King David and King Solomon. King Solomon's famous for his test upon two mothers when they were arguing over a baby, and he gave them an ultimatum. We can talk about that more in class because it's an excellent example of early Hebrew justice. The Israelites believed in prophets, essentially humans who came down and had the voice of God spoken through them or to them, and they delivered it unto the people. Some of the famous prophets include Moses and Abraham. And the Bible is replete with tales of the prophets giving out information to the people from God himself about how to construct their daily lives and what laws and rules they should follow. As I mentioned, one of the important elements of this book that I find that does very well is it talks about daily life. And one of the important elements of daily life for the Hebrews was marriage. Now, the early Hebrews were polygamous. By polygamous, I mean that they could marry many people. Now, it's not one wife marrying many husbands, it was one husband marrying many wives. The richer the person was in Hebrew society, the more wives he could have, even though they did have strict numbers that were cut off before you could stop marrying so many people. Hebrew society was male-dominated, though there were some famous Hebrew women that are even recorded in the Bible itself. One of the main important elements of Hebrew society is education, though. Education played a prominent role, and in fact, it still does in modern-day Israel. I wrote down an interesting ancient Hebrew quote. It says, "He who does not teach his son a useful trade is bringing him up a thief." So it was impingent upon Hebrew men to teach their sons a valuable trade, essentially giving their sons something to do, because if you don't, they're more likely to fall into bad and evil things, such as stealing. I want to move on, and I encourage you to go through and read about the Hebrew culture in depth, and we'll talk about it more in class, but I want to go into another nearby culture near the Hebrews, and that was the kingdom of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a kingdom that was located on the Mediterranean Sea, north of the kingdom of Israel. The Phoenicians are famous for two things. The first is their seafaring capability. They made some early fantastic ships that allowed them to travel throughout the Mediterranean and even out into the Atlantic. They did this for the main purposes of establishing trade routes. One of their most famous colonies that they established was the city of Carthage. If those of you who are familiar with the Roman Empire may be familiar with Carthage, well, it was in fact initially established by the Phoenicians themselves. But probably the most important element of the Phoenician society was their creation of an alphabet. We saw in previous class that the Egyptians used a form of pictographs, essentially hieroglyphics, where they used symbols to represent words themselves. Now, this could be confusing for people who did not speak Egyptian. Well, the Phoenicians had a need to be able to communicate with people outside of their culture, so they developed an alphabet. Essentially, they used symbols for sounds that their language made. Essentially, we still have it now with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc., etc., where they drew up symbols to represent the sounds that the words made that were coming out of their mouth. It's pretty exciting because it allowed them to communicate and form ways of speaking with people from different cultures. We have the word phonetics actually comes from the Phoenicians themselves. Now next we're going to move on to the Assyrians and the Persians, and those will be brought to you by videos I've found online, and then I'll rejoin you to begin discussing the Greeks.